This is case 26 CRA 285, Caleb C. Flynn. Mr. Flynn, you have several charges here. Count 1 is a murder charge, is a felony of the first degree. Count 2 is 2 and 3 are both felonious assault charges, second degree felonies. Count 4 is tampering with evidence, a third degree felony, and that's count 4. Count 5 is tampering with evidence, a third degree felony. Mr. Falker?
Your Honor, Mr. Flynn would tender pleas of not guilty and would ask for this matter to be scheduled for a preliminary hearing. Mr. Flynn is residing in Tip City. He doesn't own a commercial flooring company.
The night was quiet in Ohio, the kind of quiet that blankets a town in false security. Inside a modest home, Pastor Caleb Flynn's world of sermons and prayers hit a growing storm. His wife's laughter, once a fixture of the house, would soon be silenced in a way no one in the community could have imagined. That night, the authorities would later uncover that Caleb had left the most crucial evidence of all in plain sight, a mistake that would unravel everything. From the outside, Caleb seemed devoted, a man of faith with a family and congregation who trusted him completely. But his life was threaded with secrets, the most dangerous of which involved a mistress whose name would later become central to the investigation. Text messages recovered from the hours before his wife's death showed phrases like, "It's almost done," words that seemed harmless at first glance but carried a chilling weight when combined with the events that followed. The scene inside the house told a story of violence and calculated oversight. Investigators found items that should never have been left behind if the act had been truly concealed. In the shadows of the living room, the missed evidence became a silent witness. While Caleb maintained the appearance of composure, answering calls, tending to household matters, even performing his pastoral duties, the digital and physical traces he left told a different story. By morning, the small Ohio town began to whisper. How could a pastor, a man who preached morality and devotion, be at the center of such a dark and unfolding tragedy? As investigators pieced together the timeline, a portrait emerged. A life carefully curated for the public, a life unmasked in private, and a husband whose recklessness would become his undoing. The quiet of that night would never return, replaced instead by the hum of suspicion, inquiry, and the beginning of a case that would grip a nation. By the time detectives arrived, the house was eerily quiet, every corner steeped in the normalcy of domestic life, yet hiding the chaos of the crime that had just occurred. Inside, subtle inconsistencies began to surface. A vase knocked over, a faint smear on the carpet, the kind of details a cursory glance might dismiss, but to trained eyes they spoke volumes. Among the most damning discoveries was a piece of evidence Caleb had overlooked, the single item that could tie him directly to his wife's death. It sat in plain view, almost daring investigators to notice it. Forensic teams meticulously documented the scene, photographing every angle, collecting fingerprints, and analyzing fibers. Every movement Caleb had made in the hours leading up to the incident was scrutinized. Meanwhile, digital evidence started to tell a parallel story. Text messages between Caleb and his mistress, timestamped just hours before the tragedy, painted a chilling sequence. Messages that hinted at preparation, expectation, and the unsettling awareness of what was about to unfold. Investigators noted the cryptic phrasing, cross-referencing it with his known movements and interactions that evening. As the day wore on, it became evident that this was not a crime of passion caught in the heat of the moment. It bore hallmarks of deliberate action. Yet Caleb's presence in the public eye complicated the narrative. To the community, he remained the composed pastor, attending to duties and answering questions with a calm demeanor. But behind the scenes, law enforcement worked to unravel a timeline that connected his digital footprints, physical actions, and overlooked evidence into a single, incriminating thread. By evening, the puzzle began to take shape. The overlooked evidence once missed now stood as the centerpiece of the investigation. Every detail, from a misplaced object to a fleeting text, was being reconstructed. What a timeline that placed Caleb in critical positions at precise moments. Each piece of the puzzle seemed to confirm the suspicions that had already begun to grow. This was not a simple domestic tragedy, and the apparent oversight at the crime scene was a fatal mistake. Attention quickly turned to the mistress. Messages recovered from Caleb's phone showed a relationship that went far beyond casual communication. In the hours leading up to his wife's death, phrases like "it's almost done" and "see you soon" were timestamped, suggesting foreknowledge of events. Investigators compared these communications with phone location data and witness statements, reconstructing a chilling sequence of movements. Every text, every call, every digital footprint was now being treated as evidence, a silent witness to the calculated decisions made that night. Meanwhile, the physical evidence at the home gained new significance. Items that seemed insignificant in isolation, scuff marks, furniture slightly displaced, even a faint trace left on the carpet, were now reevaluated in the context of this timeline. Forensic teams painstakingly documented these findings, creating a detailed map of the house and the actions taken within it. Each overlooked detail, once dismissed as accident or coincidence, became a crucial link connecting Caleb to his wife's death. The community, meanwhile, began to understand the gravity of the situation. For years, Caleb had been a trusted pastor, a figure of moral authority. The emerging evidence, however, painted a different picture. A man living a double life, whose actions behind closed doors contradicted every sermon and every public appearance. The juxtaposition of his public persona and the growing body of evidence created a tension that gripped the town, leaving friends, neighbors, and parishioners struggling to reconcile the man they knew with the suspect under investigation. By the end of Chapter 3, the case was no longer just about a death. It was about planning, secrecy, and critical mistakes that would allow law enforcement to trace the events hour by hour, ultimately exposing the truth that Caleb Flynn had tried to conceal. The investigation intensified as detectives moved from reconstruction to confrontation. Every movement Caleb Flynn had made was under scrutiny, and the overlooked evidence from the house had become a critical focal point. Investigators realized that the seemingly minor details, the position of objects, faint smudges, and traces left behind, were not accidents. They were the fingerprints of a man who believed he could control the narrative, only to be undone by his own mistakes. Authorities began questioning Caleb, observing his behavior, his answers measured but increasingly strained. The text messages with his mistress were laid out plainly, their timing and content impossible to dismiss. Phrases that once seemed cryptic now carried heavy implications. Investigators noted inconsistencies between Caleb's statements and the physical evidence, each contradiction tightening the circle around him. The quiet confidence he had maintained in public was eroding under the weight of scrutiny, revealing a man forced into reactions he had not planned for. At the same time, forensic analysis provided more clarity. Digital records, cross-referenced with phone location data, confirmed Caleb's movements in the critical hours. Every detail, every seemingly minor action, was documented and analyzed. The evidence painted a picture of premeditation and calculated oversight. The mistress' involvement, previously inferred only from messages, now took shape in the broader context, exposing a network of deception and secrecy that had allowed Caleb to maintain his public persona while the truth quietly emerged. The community watched in disbelief as the investigation unfolded. The man they had trusted, whose sermons had emphasized honesty and devotion, was revealed as someone capable of deliberate concealment. The overlooked evidence, once a small, unnoticed element of the crime scene, had become the key that unlocked the full scope of the events. In the shadows of Ohio's quiet streets, a life carefully curated for the world was unraveling under the relentless gaze of law enforcement, leaving behind a trail of shock, betrayal, and unanswered questions. The investigation moved into its most critical phase as law enforcement began connecting every piece of evidence into a cohesive timeline. Caleb Flynn's movements, previously clouded by his carefully maintained routine, were now traced hour by hour. Phone records, digital messages, and physical evidence combined to show a disturbing pattern, one that investigators described as methodical and deliberate. The oversight at the crime scene, the very detail that could have been dismissed, became the linchpin that tied everything together. Every conversation with the mistress was scrutinized. Investigators noted not only the content of the messages, but also their timing. They aligned these communications with his actions in the house, his interactions with neighbors, and even brief excursions outside, painting a picture of a man whose duplicity extended beyond his private life into calculated attempts to manipulate reality. What had seemed like minor oversights, the placement of objects, faint marks, and digital footprints, now formed a clear trail leading directly back to him. Forensic teams reconstructed the sequence of events inside the home, overlaying it with the timeline from digital evidence. Each movement, each misstep, revealed a chain of cause and effect that Caleb could not undo. It became increasingly clear that the crime was not spontaneous, but executed with a level of planning that investigators described as chilling in its precision. His public persona, the pastor who had counseled his community on morality and trust, was now inseparable from the private actions that had led to tragedy. The town watched in stunned silence as details emerged. Friends and parishioners struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the evidence mounting against him. The overlooked evidence, the very element that had seemed inconsequential, had become the central key in unraveling Caleb Flynn's actions. What began as suspicion was now undeniable. The convergence of forensic, digital, and eyewitness evidence painted a single, undeniable truth. The quiet Ohio community had been shaken to its core, the facade of normalcy stripped away to reveal a calculated betrayal at the heart of a family once thought safe.
Feels like a feeding frenzy on his client, Caleb Flynn.
It always amazes me at the stupid statements that are made on social media.
Mulligan told me Caleb Flynn's case is not ready for a preliminary hearing just a week after his arrest.
Sir, I just want to take care of my daughters. I'm not at risk.
Mulligan said there is a lot of hate and other emotions being directed at his client. Tip City Police arrested him a week ago. They'd been called to the couple's home on February 16th when Caleb made a phone call indicating an intruder shot his wife. Ashley Flynn's death left two girls without a mother and a community without a popular teacher and coach. Caleb Flynn's lawyer is trying to slow down what he calls a runaway rush to judgment.
People who are hungry for any information are liable to believe anything that they hear.
Mulligan told me he has talked to Caleb Flynn but did not share details of those conversations. He said a delay is also good for police and prosecutors waiting for test results and information.
That's the question when you go to court. What can they prove? And there has to be real evidence rather than rumors and speculation.
Back live here, you can still see tributes being left here for Ashley Flynn. Now, police are still waiting for test results of evidence that was gathered here and waiting for forensic downloads from devices that were seized here as well. And that's all playing into this delay as well. The preliminary hearing moved back about a month by the judge until late March. Reporting live in Tip City, Mike Campbell.
The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Investigators now had a full picture of Caleb Flynn's actions, from his earliest movements that day to the critical oversight at the scene that had exposed him. Each overlooked detail, once dismissed as inconsequential, now served as undeniable proof of premeditation. Digital messages, phone records, and forensic evidence converged, leaving little room for doubt. The chain of events, reconstructed with painstaking care, revealed a sequence of calculated decisions, each one bringing him closer to a crime he could not erase. The role of the mistress became clearer as investigators traced her communications and involvement. While she did not physically participate in the act, the messages exchanged suggested she was aware of Caleb's intentions. The timing and phrasing of her responses provided context for his planning, further solidifying the timeline of premeditation. Law enforcement's methodical approach transformed these digital breadcrumbs into a narrative that left the town and the public shocked. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the shocking reality. For years, Caleb had been a trusted spiritual leader, a man whose words had guided families and counseled congregants. Now, the same man was implicated in a crime that seemed to contradict every sermon he had ever given. Friends, neighbors, and parishioners were left questioning not only the events of that night, but the very nature of the person they thought they knew. The juxtaposition of public image and hidden reality intensified the sense of betrayal and horror that gripped Ohio. As investigators prepared to present their findings, the importance of the overlooked evidence became even more apparent. It had been a silent witness, a single misstep that allowed law enforcement to reconstruct events with remarkable clarity. Caleb Flynn, once a figure of authority and respect, was now ensnared by the very details he had failed to control. The quiet town had been transformed into a stage for a tragic revelation, a community forced to confront the dark consequences of secrecy, deception, and a single, critical oversight. With the investigation nearing its conclusion, the final pieces of evidence solidified the case against Caleb Flynn. Every overlooked detail from the crime scene, every digital message, and every movement he had made that night now fit into a single, inescapable timeline. Law enforcement could trace his actions step by step, showing a level of planning and premeditation that contrasted sharply with his public persona. What had initially appeared as a shocking domestic tragedy was now revealed as a series of calculated decisions that left no room for ambiguity. Forensic experts continued to review and cross-reference the physical evidence. Even the smallest traces, a fingerprint here, a scuff mark there, a misplaced object, became critical in reconstructing the events. Meanwhile, Caleb's communications with his mistress were analyzed in detail. Investigators noted that the timing and content of each message aligned precisely with his movements, confirming that he had acted with forethought. Every overlooked detail, once dismissed as insignificant, now formed a clear chain connecting him directly to the crime. Public reaction intensified as news of the investigation spread. The town of Ohio, once trusting and supportive of their pastor, struggled to comprehend the duality of his life. Friends and parishioners were left questioning how someone so respected could commit such a calculated act. The community's shock was compounded by the realization that the crime could have gone undetected if not for the very oversight that ultimately exposed him. As investigators prepared their final reports, it became evident that Caleb Flynn's carefully curated life had unraveled completely. The evidence, both physical and digital, told a story he could no longer deny. The overlooked detail at the crime scene, once seemingly minor, had become the key that allowed authorities to reconstruct the truth hour by hour. In the quiet Ohio town, the chilling reality set in. A trusted pastor had been responsible for his wife's death, and the meticulous investigation had ensured that the truth, no matter how shocking, could not be hidden. The investigation into Caleb Flynn's wife's death concluded with a stark and undeniable reality. The crime was deliberate, calculated, and exposed only because of a single, overlooked piece of evidence. Every detail, digital messages, phone records, forensic traces, and the physical missteps at the scene had converged to form a timeline that left no room for uncertainty. What had begun as a quiet Ohio night had become a meticulous reconstruction of a husband's betrayal and a community's shattered trust. Caleb Flynn, once a pastor the story of a trusted figure responsible for such a tragedy, served as a chilling reminder of how appearances can mask reality, and how even careful deception can unravel through oversight. The investigation demonstrated the precision and diligence required to uncover the truth. Each missed detail, each timestamp message, and each physical trace had been examined, reconstructed, and connected to form a complete picture. Caleb Flynn's actions, once hidden behind sermons and smiles, were laid bare. In the end, it was not speculation or rumor but careful forensic work and digital analysis that ensured the crime could not remain hidden. The quiet Ohio town would never forget that night. The trust once placed in a pastor had been broken, replaced by the hard clarity of evidence, the reality of premeditated action, and the sobering knowledge that justice was achieved, because even the smallest detail had not gone unnoticed.